Welcome to Lecture 17, Music of Oceana. Now let's do a quick geographic overview of Oceana. It's the name of the region consisting of island groups within the Central and South Pacific Ocean. It spans over 3.3 million square miles and, of course, is mostly water. Now, there are four main types of land masses that we want to look at. First is the Australian continent. It's in the middle of what's known as the Indo-Australian Plate, and the fact that due to its location, there was no mountain building because it's not on the edge of a plate during its development. So instead, Australia's current physical landscape features were formed mainly by erosion. Then we have tectonic islands. These are found at collision boundaries between the Earth's crustal plates, and these are found specifically in the South Pacific, and it's where the two plates meet and it builds mountains like New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Then we have volcanic islands, such as Fiji and Hawaii, that are the third category of landscapes found in Oceana, and they have some of the tallest mountains on the planet, if we count the mountains going to the bottom of the seafloor. And then coral reef islands are known as atolls, such as Tuvalu, and they're the last type of landscape found in Oceana, and they are created by coral reefs that build up over time and then break the surface of the water. So we're going to look at basically 5 regions, and the first 3 were named by French navigator Jules Dumont d'Urville, and he called the first one Micronesia. You can see that on the map to my left, which means small islands. And then Melanesia, and that means black island. And here he was referring to the color of the people's skins. So it's kind of a racist term when it was first put together. But what's interesting is that they have the darkest skin of any groups except the Australian Aboriginals, and that's because of their common origin. Then Polynesia, which means many islands, and that's this large area in the triangle. The triangle is actually Easter Island, Hawaii, and New Zealand. And New Zealand comes from the word Zeeland in Dutch for sea land, which is rather interesting. And then Australia comes from the Latin term terra australis, meaning land of the south. On the right side of the slide, you'll see this globe, and my cursor is circling around all of Oceana. This is a huge area. Now, the really interesting thing is that the cultures have many similarities. We're talking about 41 million people with mixed cultural influences. So it would take us probably a whole quarter to go through each country and really look at the dance styles and the musical traditions. But there are some general traditions that we're going to look at, specifically singing and some of the instruments that are the most popular and well-known that help us identify these island areas. So we're going to just look at samples of Oceana music and instruments. So let's start with the bull roarer. And the bull roarer is an ancient ritual music instrument, and it's a device historically used for communicating over great distances. It's a small stick that's been carved with a really sharp edge on one side like a wing, sometimes with serrated edges on the other opposite side. And when it's spun around on the string, it makes an amazing sound. And you get to hear some examples of that. It dates back to the Paleolithic era, being found in the Ukraine, dating back from 18,000 BC. So this is one of those instruments that definitely came from Africa, but it followed human migration. It's found in Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Australia. It's best known now for being in Australia, though it is in all of those cultures, and has a very strong religious significance in Australian Aboriginal culture. As a matter of fact, it's not supposed to be played by an Aboriginal in public. It's supposed to be a secret sound and secret ceremony. Let's look at the didgeridoo, a wind instrument played with continuously vibrating lips to produce a continuous drone while using a special breathing technique called circular breathing. So I'll demonstrate that at the end of class. But the didgeridoo was developed by Aboriginal peoples of Northern Australia at least 1,500 years ago. It is now used throughout the world. It became very popular, and though still mostly strongly associated with Indigenous Australian music. It's very ceremonial, and the idea is to keep a continuous sound, and we'll see how that works. Then we have the ukulele. It's a member of the lute family of instruments and generally employs 4 nylon strings. You can see that it looks familiar to us because it comes from Europe and then originally from Africa. And the ukulele is a small guitar, and it was introduced to Hawaii by Portuguese immigrants from Madeira, Portugal. Now, the name roughly translates as jumping fleas, perhaps because of the movement of the player's fingers. We're going to see some amazing ukulele playing. And the tone and the volume of the instrument vary with size and construction. But it is a wonderful instrument that is completely associated now with Hawaii. And then we have the steel guitar. Now, this is any guitar usually played while moving a steel bar or similar hard object against plucked strings. And the bar itself is called a steel, and the source of the name, steel guitar. Now, it's known for its portamento capabilities. That's sliding or gliding smoothly over every pitch between notes. And the instrument can produce a beautiful, almost crying sound and a deep vibrato, emulating the human voice. And it goes back to 1890 by Joseph Kekuku, where he played the guitar on his lap and used a piece of wood or a piece of steel to slide back and forth between notes. Then we have the slack key guitar. Now, this is just a regular guitar. However, it's tuned what they call loosely. And this is a fingering style and tuning that the Hawaiians made their own after the Mexican cowboys were introduced into their Spanish guitars in the late 19th century. And so the Hawaiians didn't like that tuning system and created their own. And they've developed their own style of playing. It's one of the most beautiful, soothing, smooth style of playing of any guitar in the world. And so once again, slack key guitar is not the guitar itself, but it is the way of playing it and tuning it. Then we have the slit drum. And we know that this goes back to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Oceana. The only difference here is the materials, the wood that's used, and one long slit usually. We're going to see a demonstration from a Samoan slit drum player and how they use this in rowing competitions. And it probably was used as a signal system for a war, used in dances and in ceremonies. But it's very ancient, and this goes back to Mother Africa. Then we have the nose flute. It's called the Ohehanu Ihu, or bamboo nose flute, and it's found on many island groups in the Pacific. In Hawaii and Samoa, it's considered a sweetheart's instrument. It's not a loud instrument. Rather, the tone is intended to be soft and gentle. The video that we're going to watch is going to explain why it's played through one nostril, and it's really an interesting philosophical and ceremonial idea. Then we have the hula. It's a Polynesian dance form accompanied by chant, which is known as oli, or song, mele, which is a cognate of meke from the Fijian language. Now, it was developed in the Hawaiian Islands by the Polynesians who originally settled there. The hula dramatizes or portrays the words of the oli or the mele in a visual dance form. And the video we're going to see explains that very well. Then we have the haka. And this is a dance performed by a group with vigorous movements and stamping of the feet with rhythmically shouted accompaniment. Now, this goes back to the Maorian culture in New Zealand. And although it's commonly associated with traditional battle preparations of male warriors, haka have long been performed by both men and women, and several varieties of the haka fulfill social functions within Maori culture. So they can be performed to welcome distinguished guests or to acknowledge great achievements, occasions, or funerals even. And lastly, we're going to look at Hawaiian singing. Of course, there is singing throughout Oceana, but Hawaiian singing is probably the most popular in the world today. And it includes several varieties of kind of chanting, which is known as mele, as mentioned earlier, and the music meant for highly ritualized dance, for hula. But traditional Hawaiian music and dance was functional. It was used to express praise, communicate genealogy and mythology, and accompanying games, festivals, and other secular events. The Hawaiian language has no word that translates precisely as music, but a diverse vocabulary exists to describe rhythms, instrument styles, and elements of voice production. And we get to hear one of the most famous Hawaiian singers ever. Lastly is your musical assignment, and it's watch all the videos and take the quiz on Google Docs. Please get these done. I'll see you in class. Thank you.